Some Canadian soldiers felt unrecognized, misunderstood, and even betrayed by the governments that sent them overseas. Many suspected the cover-up about the dangers of modern peacekeeping was intentional, the result of a DND, or Department of National Defense, public relations program that kept the Canadian public ignorant of the truth until after the murder of a 16-year-old boy in Somalia in 1993. That's when Canadians began to understand that all soldiers came home changed. But some came home on stretchers, and some came home in chains, and those truths were deliberately concealed.
When I tell large Canadian audiences that we've had 17 killed in the former Yugoslavia and over 100 seriously injured, the vast majority of the audience thinks I'm misleading them. They don't believe that.
But very often I witnessed reports that showed that Canadians are involved in combat actions being rewritten. And the stories we would get back would not be, what had happened on the ground. Definitely playing down the danger side of it.
I actually saw the reports concerned that had come in both from Somalia and from Bosnia, where the incidents that occurred, where Canadian troops were under fire and this sort of thing, was never reported.
In one particular case, one of our guys was killed by an anti-tank rocket, and the storyline that they gave to the media was that it was accidental mortar fire that just happened to be landing near his carrier. That wasn't the case. The Serbians had warned the Canadian commander not to place that vehicle there. He was hit with a direct fire, broad daylight. The weapon was aimed deliberately at him. The rocket punctured his chest, exploded on the turret behind him, and literally blew him in half. Everybody knew that. The unit knew that. But the word that got back and got out in the media, and even to his family, was that of the mortar.
I set out to find a list of simply what our casualties had been and what the causes were. This turned out not to be an easy list to find because no one was properly tracking it. I discovered that a former classmate of mine was working at National Defense Headquarters, and he had a list which they used to answer questions from. So there was no doubt at National Defense Headquarters, that people had been hurt. And those were the easy ones to explain. Others had no apparent explanation at all, particularly names which appeared on the list as having been injured accidentally.
We would basically go out every night, roughly the same time, and do this large route.
A couple of soldiers who were part of the reinforced company group that went to Srebrenica. One day, while two of them were out, they came under fire, and both of them went down.
I see something move to the left of me, and then the next thing I know is I saw a bright orange, felt a large hot flash over my body, and next thing I knew, I was face down.
One of them was quite badly injured in his lower legs.
I've been hit, and try to get up. That's when I realized I'm in a lot of pain.
The other could crawl to safety enough to get on his radio.
Because I crawled, probably that saved my life.
The inaccuracy of the accidental description was pointed out to me by the company commander himself, who was thoroughly upset to discover that a couple of his soldiers who really had been attacked were listed as merely having accidents.
They said that my incident was an accident.
How someone is listed as being accidentally injured when they were in fact casualties of combat truly remains to be answered. But I published that list as a sidebar. I was astounded to be flooded by emails and voicemails and letters and phone calls and just being buttonholed in the hallways by soldiers who essentially said, nice list, Lieutenant, but I should be on it. Let me tell you why. The authorities certainly were not happy to see our diligence at the newspaper. The outcome, in short, was that Captain Kennedy returned to training recruits rather than editing a newspaper. That is to say, I was fired.
The cover-up environment from which Captain Kennedy was fired appeared to some to be part of a DND public relations good news only campaign.
Your average person doesn't understand or really recognize the dangers that these guys are facing, and that is where the public relations policy at DND is sadly lacking.
When I first began working at NDHQ, I was working in a directorate at that time just called Exhibitions and Displays. And I was instructed by one of my superiors at that time not to talk about fighter jets or the Canadian Armed Forces. And I said, well, what's wrong with the armed part of armed forces? Well, we don't want to play that part up. And I thought at the time, this organization has got some serious problems.
When I was there, and I think it's still the case, people were forbidden to use the word war, and they were talking about general purpose combat and near combat. All of this is nonsense, absolute nonsense.
It's a strange world we live in where this is a military after all. I mean, they do carry guns and they have a right to kill people and do things that I can't do or you can't do. Yet somehow we don't want them either to get killed or kill anybody. It's a strange phenomenon.
I think there's an understanding in the military that Canadian citizens prefer to think of their peacekeeping troops as Boy Scouts who sort of accidentally are carrying rifles.
The government doesn't like to advertise the fact that we actually have to pull triggers and sometimes kill people. If you're actually fighting people and your sons and daughters are coming home in body bags, people begin to question, why are we there? What is the point?
Those who reported the facts of injured Canadian soldiers were punished. Some of those soldiers, despite their commitment and bravery, were also treated poorly.
All of a sudden, I got a phone call. They gave me 22 days and said, in 22 days, you're released on a medical 3A. And they came up in a car and made me sign all the papers, and basically I was flung. That was it.
According to Department of National Defense, CFAO, yada, 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 subsection, whatever, because you are no longer in an active theater of operations, your contract is no longer valid and your contract will now be terminated.
I got caught under a clause in the military called the universality of a soldier, which is the Army's term for saying if you can't go to a different country right away, you're no longer employable, so we push you out of the service.
Some wounded regular soldiers were pensioned off. Some reserves were simply let go.
It meant that they weren't going to pay me anymore, because basically the way they were treating me was that I was a domestic mercenary.
It's like somebody's torn your heart out and just tossed it away, because that's my life. I mean, you guys talk about it as a career. That was my soul, my life. I loved what I did. I still would love to do it. And the people in Ottawa have taken my heart, spat on it, threw it on the ground, and jumped on it about 8 times.